The deep snows of Armenia nearly finished them. The satrap Pharnabazos had promised them safe passage, then shadowed their column, waiting for the army to stumble. But the scouts found his camp almost undefended, its master away on the road behind them. In a sudden, daring raid, the lightly armed Greeks fell upon it and seized his stores, his own tent, even his silver-footed couch. Resupplied and emboldened, the 10,000 pressed on, north and north and north again. They crossed mountain ranges and vast empty plains, past silent villages, and lost yet more men to the cold, to hunger, and to the spears of hill tribes. Then, in the spring, they came to a city, the first they had seen in months, and its people told them the thing they had begun to fear they would never hear. The sea was only a few days away. On the 5th day after leaving that city, Xenophon rode at the rear, guarding the back of the long column as it climbed an immense slope toward a high mountain pass. The air thinned. They were more than a mile above the world, and then, tumbling back down the line of men, came a sound he had not heard in a year. Shouting, rising and swelling, passing from rank to rank. His heart sank. He was certain it was a battle cry, that beyond the crest a Persian army lay waiting, and that this pass would be the place where they all died. So he spurred his horse up through the press of soldiers to see for himself, and as he reached the center of the line, he finally made out the word the men were roaring, over and over, with tears streaming down their faces. Thalassa, Thalassa, the sea, the sea. They poured over the pass and down toward the water, and when they reached the shore at last, they fell upon one another, weeping and embracing, and heaped up a great mound of stones to mark the place where they had seen the sea. They came to Trebizond, a Greek city on the Black Sea coast, and there, after long waiting, they found ships, and the final stages of the journey carried them home. Consider what they had done. A leaderless army of mercenaries had marched into the very heart of the Persian Empire, lost their prince and their generals, and then fought its way out again across 1,000 miles of hostile land. The great king, with all his power, had not been able to destroy them, and every Greek who heard the tale drew the same lesson from it. The empire that had seemed invincible could be entered and beaten, and walked out of alive. As for Xenophon himself, he came home to heartbreak. He reached Greece just too late for what he counted the great tragedy of his age. While he had been gone, the Athenians had put his teacher on trial. They had condemned Socrates and put him to death in the year 399 BC. And Xenophon grieved for the rest of his life that he had not been there in his master's hour of need. Exiled from his own city of Athens, he settled in the Peloponnese as a guest of the Spartans, and he turned to writing. He wrote on horsemanship and on hunting, on the Spartan king he admired, and on Socrates himself. A whole book of the conversations he could still remember. But the work that would make his name told the story he had lived with his own feet. He called it the Anabasis, the going up, the tale of 10,000 Greeks and the extraordinary turns of fortune they had overcome, and it became something far greater than a memoir. Greeks who wanted to understand Persia read it. Soldiers who wanted to learn war read it. Anyone who wanted to know what courage looked like read it. And generations later, it fell into the hands of a restless young prince in the north of Greece, a boy named Alexander. He read Xenophon's account of 10,000 men who had walked into the heart of the Persian Empire and walked out alive, and from it he drew a single, dangerous idea. If 10,000 could do that, then an army led by the right man might do far more. The march could be made, but the world those 10,000 returned to was not the one they had left, and that is where our story turns next. Picture a world turned upside down. When Xenophon and his 10,000 Greek mercenaries finally fight their way out of the Persian Empire and reach mainland Greece in the early 390s BC, they find a homeland they no longer recognize. They had marched away in 401 BC. Back then, Athens lay crushed, defeated, broken. Persia had joined with Sparta to destroy the Athenian Empire and force the city to surrender. The long walls that tied Athens to its harbor at Piraeus had been torn down. The historian Thucydides, who chronicled the whole 27-year war, was so certain Athens was finished that he marked 404 BC as the end of everything. He was wrong. Within a single decade, the impossible happens. Persia raises Athens from the dead. Thucydides drew his grim conclusion only because he did not live to see what came next. Just as Persian gold had once let Sparta defeat Athens, the Persians now reverse their loyalty entirely. They throw their support behind Athens, against Sparta, and help set the broken city back on its feet. To understand this reversal, we must start with one man. At Sparta, there lives a leader named Lysander, charismatic and visionary. He alone had grasped how to defeat Athens, win the friendship of Persia, secure Persian gold to pay the rowers who power the war galleys, and catch the Athenians unsuspecting. The strategy worked exactly as he planned. Athens fell. But victory swells Lysander with pride, and pride will set in motion everything that follows. The conqueror is about to become the problem. 27 years earlier, Sparta had marched to war under a noble slogan. It would liberate the Greeks from oppressive Athens. Now, Lysander betrays that promise. Instead of freeing the Greek cities, the Spartans simply seize the old Athenian empire and force those same cities to pay tribute to Sparta. The Athenians had ruled with relative justice and a firm respect for law. The Spartans observe no law at all. Each Spartan officer behaves as a tyrant whose word is absolute. And so, the Greeks come to hate the Spartans far more bitterly than they ever hated Athens. They begin to long for freedom from their so-called liberators. This is the cruel irony Xenophon discovers on his return. The liberators have become the oppressors, and the conquered world quietly aches for someone, anyone, to set it free again. The Persians are growing resentful too. Spartan hubris is driving them to attack Persian holdings. To a Greek, hubris means not mere arrogance, but arrogant violence. And Lysander's ambition has no ceiling. He dreams of becoming the great invader of Persia, and ultimately of making himself king of Sparta. There is a problem. Lysander was born a noble Spartan, but he stands outside the direct line to either of Sparta's two royal thrones. He resents this bitterly. He believes a crown should be his by right. So he tries to enlist the gods themselves. He approaches the oracles, even paying for pronouncements that Sparta should take steps that would somehow make him king. One oracle he courts lies far away in Africa, in the Libyan desert, the famous oracle of Zeus Ammon at the oasis of Siwa. When the Spartans outmaneuver him at home, Lysander changes his plan. If he cannot be king himself, he will install a king of his own choosing and rule through him. His chance arrives with a succession crisis. The king Agis has just died. Now, Agis' wife had carried on a passionate affair with the dashing Athenian Alcibiades. Most people believed, probably rightly, that her son was the child of Alcibiades, not of the king. Lysander fans these doubts. Sparta, he argues, must never place a half-Athenian on its throne. Instead, he points to a kinsman of the dead king, a man named Agesilaus. Agesilaus seems perfect for Lysander's purposes. The Spartans prize towering stature and a commanding heroic bearing. Yet, Agesilaus is among the shortest Spartans of his generation, a stocky, bandy-legged man, easily lost in any crowd. Everything about Agesilaus suggests a man who can be controlled. He had spent his early life avoiding notice. He followed the harsh rules of Spartan upbringing to the letter, quiet, obedient to his elders, scarcely known to anyone. Lysander the kingmaker judges him a person of no character of his own, the perfect puppet to install and command. He could not have been more mistaken. The moment Agesilaus becomes king, he seizes control of all of Lysander's plans. When war is to be waged in Asia, Agesilaus declares that he himself will command it. He brings Lysander along as merely one of 30 advisors, and when Lysander tries to pursue a policy of his own, Agesilaus sidelines him completely. The former hero of Sparta, the kingmaker, is pushed entirely out of the picture by the very man he made. Free of his kingmaker, Agesilaus wages a vigorous war against the Persians in Asia Minor. He fights for control of the old Greek cities and the lands beyond them. He proves so successful that the Persian satrap, the provincial governor, Pharnabazos, asks for a meeting. This Pharnabazos had been the mastermind and friend of Sparta during the long war against Athens. Now, the Spartans are burning his farms. The two men meet on a grassy plain. In the normal Persian style, Pharnabazos has his attendants spread out carpets, cushions, and rich refreshments on the grass. But when Agesilaus arrives, he sits straight down on the cold, hard ground, cross-legged, with no ceremony at all. It is a deliberate insult, a Spartan rebuke of Persian softness, and Pharnabazos notices. Pharnabazos walks over and sits directly in front of Agesilaus, ignoring all the lavish preparations. Then he asks why he is being treated this way. He had been Sparta's friend, yet now the Spartans burn his farms, raid his territory, and trample his crops so that he cannot even gather his own dinner. Is this any way to treat a friend? Is it justice? Agesilaus, never before rebuked for Sparta's faithlessness, is so ashamed that he sits in silence for a long time. At last, he admits that Pharnabazos has made him feel remorse. Then he makes a stunning proposal. He urges the satrap to abandon his master, the great king of Persia, and fight alongside Sparta. Together, he promises, they will win Pharnabazos a kingdom of his own. It is the first time anyone has planted such an idea in a satrap's mind. The idea is revolutionary: turn a Persian province into an independent kingdom by rebellion against the overlord. But Pharnabazos is too loyal to accept. So long as the great king has named him his servant, he answers, he will stay loyal to him and to no one else. Then he rises and walks toward his horse. Agesilaus, deeply moved, runs after him. He confesses that he cannot help admiring such loyalty. In future, he promises, he will spare Pharnabazos' lands and raid only the territory of other Persian satraps. Then, a quiet, human moment. Pharnabazos' son, who had sat through the whole meeting, runs back to Agesilaus, gives him a gift, and declares that he wishes to make him his guest friend. And so, a formal bond of friendship is forged between the king of Sparta and the house of Pharnabazos. But the damage is already done. Before that meeting, while Agesilaus was still raiding, Pharnabazos had acted. He holds great influence in the Persian system, and he sends a messenger racing up the royal road from Asia Minor all the way to the king, who sits then at Babylon. The message is urgent. The Spartans are attacking. The only way to drive them out of Asia, he argues, is to strike them by sea and draw them away from Persian soil. And that means Persia must find a naval commander. Here lies Persia's oldest difficulty. How do you fight the Greeks, the greatest seafarers of the age, who outmatch even the Phoenicians who serve Persia at sea? The great king, Artaxerxes II, begins his search for an admiral. Artaxerxes searches, and he finds his man within his own realms. The choice is astonishing. He is an Athenian named Conon, a commander of great experience and a fair record of success. To understand how an Athenian ends up serving Persia, we must go back to the final battle of the Peloponnesian War, fought at a place called Goat Rivers on the Hellespont. There, Lysander and the Spartans had captured the entire Athenian fleet on shore. The Athenian crews had scattered carelessly inland to rest and forage for meals. Only Conon kept his crews tight beside their ships. When Lysander swept down without warning and seized the beached fleet, Conon alone escaped, with only 8 ships out of an original fleet of nearly 200. Then he fled into a world about to fall under Spartan domination. Conon flees to the island of Cyprus. In antiquity, Cyprus was divided between Greeks and Phoenicians. One of its Greek kings, Evagoras, was friendly to the mainland Greeks. His kingdom centered on a small city called Salamis in Cyprus, named for the Salamis near Athens. It had been founded by Greeks who fled to Cyprus as refugees after the collapse of Greek civilization, around 1200 BC, making them, in a sense, cousins of the Athenians. Evagoras welcomes Conon and his 8 ships gladly, because any commander with 8 trained crews and 8 ram-tipped triremes is valuable anywhere. So, Conon settles there with his son, Timotheus, and becomes a leader in exile. He is the rallying point for every Athenian who longs to resist Sparta but cannot do so at home, a government waiting on a foreign shore. In 397 BC, the great king sends word to Conon, appointing him admiral of the Persian fleet. But there is an old, familiar problem. For a century, Persian naval efforts had suffered from one fatal flaw: a failure to follow through. There was always abundant determination and impressive talk at the start. The results never came. The same pattern repeats now. Although the great king has named Conon admiral, when Conon asks the cities of the empire for ships, the Phoenician and Cilician cities stall. It would take years, they say, to build new ships and assemble crews. The whole effort begins to dissolve in his hands. Conon refuses to accept such an impotent outcome. He resolves to do something no Greek would dream of. He will go to see Artaxerxes himself, in person, and he travels to Babylon. Conon crosses to the port of Issos, goes inland to the Euphrates, and takes a boat down the river to Babylon. Babylon is the king's residence now, and it is fast becoming an unofficial second capital of the Persian Empire. But once there, he faces a wall of ceremony. The Persian kings have become very different from what they were in the days of Cyrus the Conqueror, about 150 years earlier, in the mid-6th century BC. Back then, the Persians were young, vigorous conquerors spreading across the world, and their king stood at the front of his forces, speaking face to face with enemies and friends alike. Now the king is an unapproachable figure, sealed away behind his court. One must petition merely for the chance to speak. Real dialogue has become impossible. And one ceremony the Greeks find most abhorrent of all. It is called proskinesis. To gain an audience, a petitioner must kneel, bow, kiss his own hand to the king, and nearly prostrate himself flat on the floor before the king will even acknowledge him and let him speak. For a Greek, this is unthinkable. The Greeks held an idea called eleutheria, freedom, and it embraced not only the freedom of one's city, but the freedom of the self. An independent free man bows to no one. To do so was what they called slavish. In Plato's dialogues, when Socrates urges a young Athenian to be virtuous, he warns him not to be slavish, not to be someone who merely obeys the orders of others, but to think and act for himself. So a free Greek simply cannot kneel before a king. The Greeks went to remarkable lengths to avoid it. One ambassador from Thebes, ordered to bow before the great king in order to win an audience, was so distressed that he dropped his ring on the floor, then bent down to retrieve it. That way, he could later tell his fellow envoys that he had merely been picking up his ring, while the king saw the obeisance he demanded. A small, clever lie to save a man's dignity. For Conon, then, it is simply inconceivable to enter the presence of Artaxerxes, because doing so would force him to bow. So they devise a solution. Conon and Artaxerxes remain in separate rooms entirely, and communicate through intermediaries. The Athenian never kneels. The two men negotiate the fate of an empire's navy without ever standing in the same room. Through the intermediaries, Conon lays out his complaints about Persia's failure to follow through. Artaxerxes, who respects him greatly, grants every demand. He confirms Conon as admiral. He provides all the funds he wants to pay his crews, and this is no small matter. The rowers are not slaves but free men. Each trireme holds 170 rowers, and every one of them must be paid, every single day. So, Artaxerxes hands Conon a tremendous war chest. He sends orders to the satraps and local rulers, commanding them to obey Conon's requests for ships and men. Then the king makes one proposal. He asks Conon to share command with a Persian, partly because an Athenian, a long-standing enemy in Persian eyes, is not a congenial figure for Persian commanders to work beside. Conon must choose a partner. Conon knows exactly whom he wants. Remembering Pharnabazos' reputation for fairness and valor, he asks for him, the satrap of Asia Minor. Artaxerxes agrees. Pharnabazos comes down to the sea, joins Conon, and together they swiftly assemble a large fleet and sail west toward the Aegean to confront the Spartans. But the Spartans learn they are coming. During the long months of delay that had so frustrated Conon, a merchant freighter from Syracuse in Sicily had been sitting in the harbor at Cypriot Salamis. Syracuse was a traditional enemy of Athens, ever since the disastrous Athenian expedition there from 415 to 413 BC. Its captain watches the preparations, understands exactly what is unfolding, and hurries back to warn the Spartans. A sea attack is coming. Agesilaus, the new king of Sparta, should probably have commanded the sea defense himself. Instead, in an act of pure nepotism, he hands the fleet to his own brother-in-law, a man named Lysander. Lysander has no naval experience whatsoever. His only qualification is his kinship with the king, and he does not understand tactics. He believes that battles are won the Spartan way, by charging straight at the enemy without hesitation, by simply being the bravest. But naval combat is nothing like a hoplite battle on land. On land, two lines of men collide in a shoving match to see who can push hardest. The sea is different. As Themistocles had proved long before at Salamis, naval battles are won by tactics, by stratagems, by knowledge of the terrain and the enemy. Pisander understands none of this. Pisander takes his fleet to Knidos, a beautiful city at the extreme southwest corner of Asia Minor, sacred to the goddess Aphrodite. We usually remember Aphrodite as the goddess of erotic love and beauty, but the Greeks also revered her as a great deity of the sea, said to have been born from the sea foam near Cyprus. Knidos stands on a promontory thrusting far out into the water, and her temple rises on a height overlooking the horizon, exactly where the Aegean meets the eastern Mediterranean. Meanwhile, Conon does his homework. He sends spies and scouts ahead, and learns that the Spartan fleet is smaller than his own. With his own ships, the ships of Pharnabazos, and the many Athenians flocking to his banner, Conon now commands the larger force. Conon does not yet know how hopelessly incompetent Pisander is, so he assumes he will need a stratagem to lure the Spartans into a fight, because half of winning a battle often lies in persuading the enemy to fight an engagement they should avoid. He uses the very same trick Alcibiades had used years before at Cyzicus. He sends his small Athenian squadron forward as a vanguard, parading it across the bay in front of Knidos. Behind it, hidden, Pharnabazos follows with the main body, the Phoenician, Cilician, and other Persian ships. Pisander takes the bait completely. He sees a tempting target, just a few of those hated Athenian ships. He loads all his men aboard, launches his full force at once, and sets off in eager pursuit, straight toward the trap. Conon swings his fleet around to meet the charge, and now Sparta's deepest weakness is exposed. The Spartans had no seafaring tradition of their own, so they fought at sea much as the Persians did. The ships, crews, rowers, and pilots are not Spartan, but mercenaries, hired from Asia Minor, from the islands, from the very Greek cities Sparta had conquered. And many of these hirelings dislike the Spartans, who are merely their paymasters. It is a poor situation for Pisander. He plunges into the midst of the Athenian fleet, and the battle rages hard. Then the left wing of the Spartan formation rounds the point, and there it sees Pharnabazos and the main body of the enemy fleet, fresh, ready, and vastly outnumbering them. They had thought the whole enemy force was that small Athenian vanguard. They were wrong. Panic takes the Spartan left wing. They abandon Pisander, turn for shore, and flee. Pisander himself fights on, and is killed, and once he is seen to fall, every Spartan-backed ship breaks and runs for the beach. As had been true ever since Marathon, a fleeing force that turns its undefended back to the enemy suffers enormous casualties. In the short run from the field of battle, Conon and Pharnabazos capture 50 enemy triremes. Out in the bay, thousands of oarsmen leap overboard and swim for shore to escape. Yet, even so, the victors take 5,000 prisoners, a considerable prize in ancient warfare, since captives could be ransomed to help pay for a campaign. The Battle of Knidos is a tremendous victory, won for Athens and Persia together. Now consider the irony in full. In 480 BC, almost a century earlier, Athens and Persia had been bitter enemies, fighting each other at Salamis. There, the Athenian victory over Persia launched the Athenian Golden Age, under the proud banner of resistance to Persia. And now, at Knidos, they are the closest of allies, fighting side by side against Sparta, Athens' former ally. The world has been turned inside out. Word of the disaster races to Agesilaus, who has already marched back to Greece. We know the details because Xenophon, the hero of the 10,000, had attached himself to Agesilaus and was present on the very day the news arrived. And on that same day, an eclipse of the sun darkened the sky. The Greeks regarded eclipses as portents of disaster, just as one had appeared when Xerxes set out to invade Greece. Agesilaus fears this darkness may mark the end of the Spartan Empire. He also knows another battle is imminent, and that his surrounding enemies will fight with renewed fury if they learn the truth. So, Agesilaus lies to his own troops. He announces that although his brother-in-law Lysander has fallen valiantly, the navy has won the battle, and Sparta remains master of the sea. He does it to keep his men's courage high. The land battle comes soon afterward at a place called Coronea. Agesilaus survives. But as Spartan kings did, he fought in the very front line, and being so short, he was knocked down in the crush of the phalanx and trampled, nearly killed. His officers drag him out of the press and set him back on his feet. The Spartans are not defeated outright at Coronea, but the engagement is a tactical victory for their enemies, the Thebans and other states, joined now by former Spartan allies like Corinth and Athens, all fighting against Sparta. Agesilaus makes his way home, and the Spartan Empire is effectively at an end. Defeat on land, destruction at sea. The conflict might have ended right there. Conon, with his son Timotheus, is now free to sail among the Greek cities of Asia and the Aegean, liberating them from their Spartan governors. Had matters stopped there, a balance might have emerged, with Athens and Sparta in quiet equilibrium. But one stubborn Spartan refuses to let it end. His name is Thucydides, and he holds out at Abydos on the Hellespont. Abydos is the very city where the southern end of Xerxes' great bridge of boats had been anchored in 480 BC. Thucydides is so popular with the locals that he persuades them they can defy the whole world, and he simply refuses to surrender. His defiance proves costly for Sparta. Abydos lies within the satrapy of Pharnabazos, so the satrap returns home from his great naval campaign only to find another Spartan still clinging to his doorstep, denying him access to the Hellespont. Enraged, Pharnabazos goes back to Conon with a new proposal. They will carry the war directly into Greece. The following spring, in 393 BC, they gather the navy again and cross the sea. They strike first at the island of Cythera, sacred to Aphrodite, off the southern tip of the Spartan homeland, and install an Athenian governor there. Then they sail to the Isthmus of Corinth, and there a Persian satrap and prince, Pharnabazos, comes ashore on Greek soil as the honored guest of the Athenians, Corinthians, Thebans, and all the anti-Spartan Greeks. He urges them to keep fighting the war against Sparta, and promises to fund them with treasure and gold. Then Conon makes Pharnabazos a compelling argument. If Pharnabazos strips the Spartans of their rule of the sea and restores Athens and its naval power, which he alone in all the world can do, he will injure Sparta more deeply than by any other means. The argument lands. It pleases Pharnabazos greatly. So Pharnabazos leaves the fleet with Conon, along with a great war chest, and returns to Asia Minor, while Conon sails home to Athens at last. He is received as a hero at the Piraeus. Conon brings Athens back from the dead. With the ships, he reconstitutes the Athenian navy. With the money, he rebuilds the long walls linking Athens to its harbor, making the city secure against attack by land once again. He also rebuilds the Piraeus itself, which had been wrecked after the fall of Athens, because no one then wished to see that emblem of Athenian sea power become a strong naval base again. The very walls Sparta and Persia had torn down together, Persia's gold now raises back up. The strange reversal is complete. Wishing for a guardian spirit to watch over the harbor, the Athenians recall Themistocles, the hero who had won the Battle of Salamis through his stratagems. They build him a monument on the point of land at the entrance to the great harbor, the one facing west, toward the Straits of Salamis. Archaeologists have found the very site. Its inscription declared that Themistocles lay on a high point of land, watching the merchant ships arriving from all the world, and the galleys racing in and out of the harbor. And Conon builds something more. He raises a temple to Aphrodite, called Aphrodite of the Fair Voyage, for she was the goddess who had watched over his great victory at Knidos. The sea-born goddess is thanked for a battle won upon the sea. This victory, this restoration, launches a new Athenian golden age, the age of the philosopher Plato and the orator Demosthenes. It also produces the great sculptor Praxiteles, who glorified the female form as no one had before. Greek sculpture had, until then, concentrated on male nudes. Praxiteles is the first to carve a female nude. He creates a famous statue of Aphrodite for the temple at Knidos, where the sea battle that turned the course of history had been fought.